Hello readers, it's Sasha, and today I am going to be giving you guys my full book review analysis thing for Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. So I will make note that the book review itself is all spoiler free, so if you have not read this series or book and you want to at some point, then you can continue watching this video and nothing will be spoiled for you. I've made sure of that when writing my notes that I did not include any spoilers. However, I will give several warnings and then toward the end I will be going into a spoiler-filled discussion. So if you have read the story and you're not necessarily interested in my review aspect but want to rant and rave with me in the spoiler-filled discussion, please check the description below. There is a timestamp and you can just jump to that. But if you're interested in listening to my full thoughts on the story itself and the different parts of the story, then please feel free to continue. So I've broken it down and I have like cue cards and notebooks and I really went in for this, so look at me. But I broke it down into a few different categories within the story, like plot, characterization, writing style, stuff like that. And I'm just going to give you guys some full thought processes that I had while reading, and also some of the reasons why I didn't love this story. So I have my notes in my new Owl Crate notepad, and I also, like, the thoughts that I needed more in depth, I have cue cards. So I put work into this. So let's just start. It's going to be an interesting ride. So I guess we're just going to start off by explaining the genre. So the genre of the story is a fantasy. So if fantasy is not your particular cup of tea already, this book is not hitting very many spots for you. I don't recommend a Cassandra Clare novel if you're not into fantasy, just flat out. So this is about James and Lucy Herondale, the children of the infamous Will and Tessa Herondale, and they are living a pretty mundane life in Edwardian London because there are no demon attacks. There have hardly been any demons. They haven't really had to fight any demons. So Lucy's soon-to-be parabatai and bestest friend in the entire world, Cordelia, is moving to London to try to get into the good graces of the people in London because she is part of a family whose father is now in prison. So trying to marry into a good family to get a good name for herself, which is what her parents want. Like, she doesn't want that, but that is what it is. And then we also have James's secret love, Grace Blackthorne. She is also moving to London, and James is super excited. He finally feels like he can settle down with his one true love. But obviously, it's Cassandra Clare, so shit hits the fan really quick, and soon after everyone gets settled in, plans change, and there are more demon attacks, and this group of friends has to kind of band together and figure out who is attacking, why are they attacking, and what is going on. So super interesting, super stereotypical Cassandra Clare novel, I will say that much, but I'll just dive into a few initial thoughts I have of the story. So my first initial thought is that this entire story is like looking at a hectic family tree. So when I say that, I mean that everybody is related to somebody, this person is married to this person has these kids, and these kids are engaged to this family, and there are only like 5 or 6 families, but everyone in that family is like married to somebody else or doing something else, and it was so confusing. It got to the point where I started eliminating characters because I was like, these characters aren't important, even though they were. I was just like not in a good headspace to particularly bring in every single character. I just feel like it was kind of ineffective to the story, and it was just kind of, it took away from the experience for me having to remember who everybody was and who everybody was dating, and it was a lot. Something else to mention is that Cordelia does resemble a lot of the other female characters in Cassandra Clare novels. You can't expect it to be a Cassandra Clare novel if the female characters don't represent each other a little bit. I think they all tie into each other. I mean, Clary and Tessa obviously were both thrown into the Shadowhunter world unexpectedly, and their entire lives got turned upside down within a matter of a few days. And Tessa and Emma, both strong, both witty, both completely willing to do anything for their families. And Emma and Cordelia, I think they both have sort of a hero complex. So when I say that, I mean Emma is going to do literally anything to protect the Blackthorns, who have become her family over the years. And Cordelia is doing anything she can for her father, who is potentially facing life in prison. So she wants to save him from that. So everybody kind of ties into everyone else. It's exactly what Cassandra Clare does. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, it's just, you gotta expect it going into this. Something else to note is that this story does follow the similar formulaic pattern that Cassandra Clare has been making money off of for years now, where there's a lot of a lot of drama within the story, and ultimately at the end we either confront the villain or we have a badass fight scene. So everything follows that similar structural pattern that Cassandra Clare has been making money off of. Just something to note, not necessarily a negative part of the story, because clearly I have a Shadowhunter shelf. Like, I love that pattern. I just wanted to make note of it. It does continue to follow that same structure. Next, I'll just go into some pros and cons I had with the story. My first pro is that this is like super stupid, but it is something I really love. I love when chapters have titles. I think it's so fun to have a book with a chapter title. I love that. Like, it's honestly such a good time because I feel like I'm actually getting a little bit of an insight as to what's to come in that chapter when there's a chapter title. Sometimes it's very obvious and I'm like, ooh, I know what's gonna happen. And other times it's like, ooh, what could happen? Like, I'm ready. Love chapter titles. I think they're such an underrated part of books. I love them. On a more serious topic of pros that I had with this book, I love friendship. I think friendship is such an incredible part of a story, and Cassandra Clare did this friendship group extremely well. Everybody was so incredible as friends. They were so willing to just do anything for each other. They were so caring and they were so badass, and I feel like friendships get overshadowed by relationships in different books. And at some points, I feel like maybe she did that. But overall, Cassandra Clare really hit the nail on the head with this friendship group and their dynamics and their love for each other. It was all so strong and so incredible, and I ultimately just really enjoyed my time reading it. So now we're gonna move on to some cons. So this is like, don't hate me. First of all, I had a couple of issues with the grammar in the story. So I hold Cassandra Clare's writing to a very high standard because I've seen what she can do. I know she's an incredible, incredible writer. So I expect her writing to be incredible. And I just found that the grammar issues I saw in here were just, there were so many run-ons. Run-ons were the big one. And I tried to find some passages and I ended up finding two, but they were both spoilers, so I can't talk about them here. Just know that you're going to get a few run-on sentences within this. It happens, it's not a big deal. I do hold Cassandra Clare at a higher standard than most people. So I think that is why I even bothered mentioning it. Another situation I had is that this book does switch between past and present. That is something I'm very ambivalent toward. I don't care if you're going to switch your story between past and present. If it's tastefully done, it does not impact me one way or the other. Some people really love it and some people really hate it. I don't care. But in this particular case, it did not work, in my opinion, for the story, because a lot of the times it wasn't really adding anything to our plot, which ultimately is the main part of a story. I just felt like the times I was reading the past, it was taking away from the story at present. And if you're going to put your story between past and present, I feel like they should connect. And I guess at times it did connect, but for the most part, it really didn't give us anything to do with the story itself, and ultimately gave us everything to do with the relationship drama going on. So that was kind of frustrating as a reader to have to read those. I did read them because I did feel like they were probably going to tie in, and some of them really did and some of them just did not. Another problem I had with this is that it did make a lot of references into the short stories. So Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy and what was the other one? Goes to the Shadow Market. Those two were really represented here. And I didn't know that at first because I haven't read those. So I went online just like kind of like looking for my own research for this video, and somebody was like, there were a lot of references from the novellas, and I was like, that makes so much sense. So I looked into it a little further. There were a lot of references from Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy specifically, but also Goes to the Shadow Market as well. And I think that's cool. Like, you can tastefully put a little like, oh, remember when this happened? And then the people who have like read or watched or anything that has to do with it, they can be like, yeah, I do, I remember, that's great. But it felt like it was a little too heavy in this, where there were a few too many, remember when this happened, remember when this happened. And unfortunately I didn't, so I felt like I had to do extra reading to really appreciate this story, and I never feel like I should have to do extra reading to fully grasp the concept of a story as well as the characters. It's kind of, it's a dirty thing to do. It's like a money grab thing to do. Like, if you want to fully understand the background of these characters, check out my other works. It's like, no, like, those are short stories. They shouldn't be playing such a heavy part in your main stories. And the last major con I had with this was that I feel like this is kind of something I said before, but it is very soap opera-esque. It was a lot to handle. Like, everybody was dating different people and they were in love with the wrong people, and it was just like, y'all need to simmer the fuck down. Like, it's not, this is a lot to take in. So something I want to do for every single book that I read is talk about the hot topics surrounding the story. And by that I just mean, like, sometimes there are certain things that happen within a story that people consider controversial, and, you know, I'm going to talk about if there are any within this story and kind of give my own personal explanations and opinions on said situations. So, the only really controversial thing I found was the fact that there were gay characters, and I was just kind of like, why? Like, why are you sour at that there being gay characters? Like, there are gay characters because there are gay people in real life, and that's just a part of being in the world. Like, it shouldn't be that big of a surprise. It's also a Cassandra Clare novel, so if you pick it up and you're like, everyone's gonna be straight and white, it's just like, no. Thankfully, you're very wrong on this one. The only thing I can really say to that is that, yeah, there are gay people, and that's totally chill, because it's a Cassandra Clare novel, and there's going to be. I did have an issue, however, with one of the gay relationships, because there was absolutely no chemistry. And when I'm reading about relationships in Cassandra Clare, I anticipate reading about their love and their connection, and there was just nothing between these two people, and they were so hard for me to read about. Like, I was cringing the entire time, and it's not because they were gay, it was because there was nothing between them. And then, to prove her point even further, she had to put in the sounds that they were making while they were, like, getting steamy. Ugh, I hate when authors do that, because if you're painting a good enough picture, you don't need to say these sounds that are coming out of the person's mouth while they're in their sexy times. That's just not necessary, because I should be able to fully have that picture, understand, embrace what's going on, and there was nothing there for me. So other than that, there were no issues with the gay characters, and that's the only situation I would think could cause any sort of, like, annoyance, but it's not because they're gay. So I think some people are just living really far in the past, and that's just something that they should deal with on their own or in therapy. Next, I'm going to talk about the plot. When I'm thinking of a plot of a story, I'm thinking if the characters were working toward a central goal. Was there an end goal? And in this case, yeah, there absolutely was. There was definitely an end goal. Our characters had certain situations that they were working toward. However, this bothers me so much. It got so convoluted with relationship drama, and I'm so not here. 2020 is not the year for so much fucking relationship drama to affect your fucking plot line so much. Like, obviously it's important to have other things than the plot, because if you're just focusing on the plot, the story just kind of gets a little bit repetitive, and obviously we need to create tension elsewhere. But everything had to do with the gross relationships and the shitty relationships that were happening. And I was just so over it. I was just like, you know what? It's fine. We can just totally lose track of what's actually important, and we can totally focus on the fact that you're horny for this little bitch. Like, yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about it. I was unimpressed. But I will say that the plot was really interesting. The way that it was done was unique. I did not need so much relationship drama. Like, I felt like I was back in high school, and I just did not need that in my life. So next, we're going to talk about pacing. So when it comes to the pacing in the story, I did find the pacing a little bit wonky. It was very, very slow at the beginning. The first, I would say 60% of the story was incredibly slow. I think it's just because we were getting reintroduced to the characters that we loved from the Infernal Devices, as well as meeting all of their children. So it did take a little bit of time for us to introduce ourselves to everyone, but ultimately it was very disengaging at the beginning, and I just did not enjoy my time reading it, and I was reading it more so for a chore than for anything else, and I did not love that, so that was just kind of shitty. But the last 40% picked up, and I was so interested, and I was so invested in how it turned out, and I read it all. I read the rest in one sitting, so yeah, I was invested. Like, invested. Now let's talk about characters and characterization. So I'm going to talk about, like, I think 6 characters, because the rest of them didn't play as much of a role in the story, and also we didn't really get to know enough about them for me to comment on them just yet. Maybe in the next book I will. However, let's chat about Cordelia, who is, I think, God. I love her so much. I think she's easily the best female lead that Cassandra Clare had come up with in quite some time. She was witty, she was strong, she didn't always think with her heart, but she actually brought her mind into it too, which was like, that's the ultimate sexy point, is when a character can think with both of their heart and their mind. Like, you might as well rip my pants off now because I'm ready. She was just a really perfect character, not perfect, imperfectly perfect, which is even better. And overall, I was really happy with her, and honestly, I think she's the reason that I almost rated the book 4 stars instead of just giving it a 3, because she was so spot on as a character, and I ultimately really enjoyed reading about her. I also had a couple other characters I really enjoyed reading about. So Matthew, who is James' Parabatai, and Anna, who I think she's a Lightwood, but honestly, at this point, I don't fucking remember because everybody was related to everybody, and it was just a lot to remember. But honestly, they were both 2 really spot-on characters. They were funny, they were interesting, they just did not have enough time on the pages. Let's talk about James Herondale. James Herondale is the definition of vanilla. He had no personality whatsoever. The only personality he had, like, he had 2 personality traits. One was, I am the child of a warlock, so I have issues. And 2 was, I'm in love with Grace Blackthorne. That was it. There was nothing else about him that was at all relevant, except for, like, at a couple of parts. And I was just like, that's cool. I know you're the child of a warlock. I know you're in love with Grace Blackthorne, but, like, give me a little bit of something else. Give me some substance in your life, because I need to know more about you. But that was it. And ultimately, he just became a very whiny character because of those 2 things. But I think he'll be more interesting in the second book, just because of how the first book ended. So I have high hopes for James Herondale. We'll see what happens. Next is Lucy Herondale. Lucy Herondale, she's an incredible character, but she's so underrated, and she also doesn't get enough book time. Compared to some of the other characters that really just didn't matter to the story, Lucy really, really did. The other 2 characters I want to talk about are Grace and Alistair. Grace and Alistair were both extremely interesting and different characters. They added something completely different to the story, but again, they just did not get enough time in the story. And I think when you read this, or if you've read it, you can understand what I'm saying by when I say they're interesting, but all I can say is that they're a lot different than a typical Cassandra Clare character, and I think they'll be playing both really integral roles in the second book. So I'm excited for when that happens. So next, I'm going to move on to authenticity. So when I say this, it's basically just me talking about whether or not the back of the book did a good job at giving us any sort of idea as to what's to come, because sometimes the synopsis will either do a fantastic job or it'll do the worst job ever. In this case, I do think the synopsis did a really good job. I felt like it followed exactly the pattern that the synopsis had set up for me. So if you're going into this looking for a true to the cover story, this is what you're going to get. Next is world building. Now when it comes to world building, Cassandra Clare has done a fantastic job, and I mean that because she really puts a lot of work into her worlds. It's not like she's creating a new world, but she's taking parts of the real world and then building elements around that, and I think that's ultimately just as challenging and just as rewarding as creating your own world. But I really love her world building. With this book, there wasn't a lot that needed to be done because it was already introduced to us in the Infernal Devices. There were obviously some things she had to do to connect the story together and make it cohesive. So the things she did have to do were phenomenal and really well done and really well thought out, but ultimately there wasn't a lot needed to be done just because she'd set the tone in the Infernal Devices. There wasn't a lot that needed to be done. So next I'm going to talk about something that's probably going to get me in a little bit of hot water, but we love a good controversy moment. The writing style. So having just read The Dark Artifices, I had such high hopes for the writing style in this, because when I read The Dark Artifices, my soul left my body. Like, it was such a fantastic series. The writing was so elegant and beautiful and sophisticated, and there was a level of maturity, and I was like, I'm growing up with these books, so the age that I'm at now, you know, as a 21-year-old, I really appreciated her writing style maturing with me. It felt really important to me as a reader, and I just overall really loved that when I read the story. So I anticipated the same thing for Chain of Gold, and I was let down, to say the least. So I'm just going to compare a couple of passages. So I have Lady Midnight here, the first book in the Dark Artifices series. So I have a passage that I'm going to read to you guys in my best narrator voice. There was a wild feeling in Emma's blood, the desire to seize Julian, to do something, crush his hands in hers, put her arms around him, cause them both pain, make them both taste the same seeking desperation. She couldn't understand it, and it terrified her. Like, hi, sign me up for whatever that is, because this sums up perfectly Cassandra Clare's forbidden love money vacuum, because that's all that Cassandra Clare does, but I'm still like going to throw my money at her. So this perfectly summed that up, and every single passage within this was so eloquently written and beautifully done, and my soul was just like the whole time. So let's move on to a little quote from Chain of Gold. And I'm not saying there weren't any fantastic quotes, because there were some beautiful, beautiful quotes. However, this is more of the vibe that was going on this entire story. So, at any moment, Cordelia knew her mother would notice that she was drifting in the middle of the dance floor like an abandoned tugboat and charge toward her, and then Cordelia would die. She would die of the humiliation. So first of all, that sentence was just not done correctly. And now that I'm noticing it, like this could easily be as part of the grammar situation I was talking about earlier. It's not a run-on, but there are commas that aren't supposed to be there. And there are places where there should be commas and they're not. So that's fishy. Obviously, like I chuckled out loud. I read An Abandoned Tugboat. I thought that was funny. But upon further reflection, I was just like, really? Like an abandoned tugboat? Like that's it? I've experienced good satire, and the Dark Artifices series as a whole has really, really good satire and really mature humor, and it's funny. And it felt like a step backward for me in terms of her writing. If that didn't help you, I'm sorry, but it made sense to me. So next little category is, did I predict the ending? So was the ending this super predictable, unnecessary ending that anybody could have read this and picked up on? No, it was not. There were certain parts about the story itself that I predicted even after reading a couple chapters, and then they did this big reveal and I was like, no shit, really, of course. But the ending itself had me shooketh. I was not ready. I was not mentally and emotionally prepared for what happened at the end. So it's definitely, there's a plot twisty type situation that I'm not sure I'm over, and I'm not sure I can wait till like March to experience. Next, I'm just going to talk a little bit about representation. So we did have a Persian main character, as well as some lesbians, bisexuals, gays, people like that. I'm sure the pool is going to expand even further in the second and third books, because that's just what Cassandra Clare does, and I love it. But as far as representation goes, there is a healthy dose in here. And in terms of content warnings, this is the last thing I'm going to talk about before I jump into my spoilers. So, content warnings. We did have a little bit of homophobia because people now don't understand that gay people are a thing. So people back then really didn't understand that gay people were a thing. There is also alcoholism in the terms of peers as well as parents, and that is something that I think was tastefully done. This is something that I actually can comment on in my personal life. And overall, I thought that it was tastefully done and interesting, and I'm curious to see how it plays into the next book. We also have sexism, because at that point in time, like, a woman needed to be for the man, that kind of bullshit. And then lastly, we get some bullying, and bullying I see towards the end more than in the beginning. That is what I picked up on. I'm sure there is more, but I honestly just didn't pick up on anything else. So now I am switching into my spoiler section. So if you plan on reading this book, don't continue watching. It's super simple. It's not hard. I will link a timestamp for the end of the video where I talk for just slightly about other things that are not spoilers. So please don't just don't do it. Like if you ever want to enjoy this book, don't keep going. I've warned you once. I'm warning you twice. Click off now, because it's about to get heated and you're not going to enjoy the time ahead of you if you've not read this. And go. There are a lot of things that have me quaking in this. So first of all, can I just say, I am super duper duper excited that Jessamine makes an appearance again. She was such a queen in the first Infernal Devices trilogy, and I'm so happy that she is a ghost that Lucy can talk to, because, oh, She was so important to the story and did not get enough credit, so I'm happy she's back. I also feel like I might be the only person who didn't know that Idris was just a country in Central Europe. Like, for some reason, I had it pictured as, like, this place in the clouds, and I was just like, when they were like, yeah, no, it's just a country in Europe, I was like, what the fuck? How did I not know that? I was so incredibly, like, what? Also, I was super duper duper excited to see Sophie again. She was my favorite side character in the Infernal Devices, so seeing her back and, like, with her husband was really cool. I'm sour that her child died, but, like, just really happy to see Sophie back, at least for even a little bit. It was nice to just find out what happens to her. Let's talk about Grace. Grace is fucking shady. I do not like Grace. I hate that I like her character because she's very interesting to read about, and in terms of characterization, I think Cassandra Clare wrote her extremely brilliantly. However, I'm so pissed at that because I hate her, and I think she's a slimy little sludge bucket with literally no fucking happiness in her life at all. I think she sucks, and I just pisses me off a little bit. I also have a very interesting theory, and this theory is probably going to go nowhere because usually when I'm like, I can predict things, I'm like so far off it's not even funny. But I think that Annabelle is tied to Grace somehow, and by that I mean I think Grace is the child of Annabelle and Malcolm. Yikes, this is a spicy take, but you know what, I feel like it might be a thing. Maybe for people who've read the novellas, they're like, no, you literal dumb bitch. That is not the case. But while I was reading it, I just kind of felt like the whole situation, like Grace, you know, was abandoned by her mother or whatever, I think. Maybe I missed something, but I feel like she lost her mother, so she was adopted by Tatiana, and things got interesting. So I think they might be tied together. Maybe not in like a child mix, and no, warlocks aren't supposed to be able to have kids. But I think they might be tied together, at least in some sense of the word. Like, I know they have the same last name, but it's definitely more than that. I also think we all could kind of figure out that Tatiana was in cahoots with the demon, and she was part of the reason the demons were coming up. Like, I think we could all figure that out just from early on hearing about Tatiana and, like, meeting her. We were all like, alright, she's a sketchy bitch, and we gotta watch our backs. And we were right. We needed to watch our backs because she was a sketchy bitch. And I think that's fine. Like, if that's who you are, like, own it and embrace it. But Tatiana was just so mentally unstable and so just messy. So I'm excited to see where her character goes in the second book and how much she can fuck things up, because that seems to be a theme that she does, and I'm honestly, like, I'm kind of here for it. We love a good pot stir, so let's go. Can I talk about Anna for a second? Because Anna is literally, like, I would be so down to be best friends with Anna. Like, I'm not even fucking joking. Like, Anna had me shaking the entire time. So when she invited Cordelia over for tea, I had a moment. She was sitting outside with Evangeline, and Cordelia comes up in the carriage. She gets to the car. Evangeline goes, after all the other girls, I thought they didn't mean anything. And Anna was like, they didn't, and neither did you. Yes, 911, I'd like to report a fatality. That was so brutal. Like, I literally quaked. I was so shook about her. Like, Anna. That's the minute I knew she was going to be my favorite side character, and I was just like, I need to watch her because she's fucking cool, and I love her, and I'm excited about her. And I still think that, like, I'm still excited about her. Let's talk a little bit about Jessie. So Jessie is a really important character in the story. Jessie is ultimately the reason that James lives, which kind of pisses me off. James was just very boring, and Jessie was very interesting as a character. I mean, he was like a ghost, but he like swirling in this in-between state. And I think that's really interesting. And I feel like Jessie should have more of a story in the next book, so hopefully he does. But honestly, he was a good person, and I really enjoyed his character, and I would give my last breath for Jessie. Also, can we just chat about some of the random ass events that happened in this that nobody ever talks about again? So first of all, let's talk about Arabella the mermaid. Why was there just a random mermaid that was poisoning warlocks, and then nothing else came of that? Like, what? Like, obviously, yeah, now the warlocks owed Cordelia and them a favor for catching it, but it's just like, what happened? Like, I needed details. There were no details. Nothing came out of it, and that made me sour. Also, apparently, Cordelia's mom, Sona, is pregnant, and she's like, only has a few months left, and like, how did nobody notice that? Like, the dresses that women had to wear back then were not particularly, like, roomy and comfortable, so I feel like you can't really hide that. I don't know. I was just kind of like, what the heck? Like, if her younger sibling is not Jesus Christ being birthed again, I will just not be impressed. Like, he better be important, because what is the point of just bringing it up randomly? Like, no, I need some depth to that. Also, okay, let's talk about James and Cordelia. I want them to be together because I don't like James. Like, James kind of sucks, and he's not a good character, and he's very boring, but when he's with Cordelia, something happens and he turns into a much more interesting character, and I want that more in my life. I need the two of them in my life together. And honestly, Cordelia was she was a boss babe. Like, she pretty much admitted to the entire, like, clave that she fucked James, which she didn't, just to fucking get him out of trouble after he burnt somebody's house down. And he's like, oh, but I'm in love with Grace Blackthorne. It's like, do you not see the literal goddess that has been put in front of you who loves you? And you're over here talking about being in love with that shady bitch? Like, are we for real? Like, is that a thing? Because I'm honestly unimpressed with this, and that's just rude. And now, in order to protect Cordelia's virtue, James has to marry her, and she has to live in a marriage for a year with somebody who she's in love with, who is in love with someone else. Like, hi, that is a soap opera. Like, I'm sure that is the plot to at least 14 soap operas in different parts of the world. Like, I can promise you it is. But, like, I'm almost done. So if you're just like, why is she still talking? Don't worry. Another thing I just wanted to mention super quick is that Cassandra Clare, oddly, is really obsessed with eyes in this book, and she, like, mentions everyone's eyes, and is very, like, his eyes shone like gold, and her eyes were piercing, and all this stuff, and I'm just like, there are other parts of the body that you could talk about. The last thing I want to talk about is, okay, no, actually there are two things. The second last thing I want to talk about is Matthew. I don't want Matthew to get in a relationship with Lucy or Cordelia. I love a good childhood friends to lovers trope. I think that's such an important trope. It's so fun. But ultimately, I want Matthew to get with Magnus. I want Matthew and Magnus to bone so bad. And I want them to get into a relationship. Because yes, Magnus does have Alec, but not yet. And we understand that Magnus has been around quite a few times. And I want Matthew to be, like, a part of his life. I want Matthew and Magnus to be together. I think it could be a sexy time. The final thing I want to talk about is Alistair. I do not want Alistair to get together with Charles, who is a dog shit human being, literal trash, and I don't want him to get with Thomas, even though Thomas sounds like an amazing human being, and Thomas seems to be a little bit interested in him, at least up until the end, where they find out what Alistair really said about his mom, which is awkward. But I don't want Alistair to get with anybody that we already know. Like, I think he deserves somebody who will give him a second chance. I don't think personally Thomas or Charles could give him a second chance. I ultimately just think he deserves better, because although he is a piece of shit, like, he is definitely a more interesting human being. So those were my thoughts on Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. It's honestly been a minute. I'm sorry, this video is gonna be so much longer than anything I put on my channel. But I'm ultimately really happy with how this story ended up. It's obviously not my favorite, but I really can't complain too much because I'm excited for the sequel. So obviously I liked it enough because I'm planning on buying it again, or the second book anyways. But yeah, please let me know in the comments below whether you enjoyed my review, if it made sense, or if it made things worse for you as a reader. And let me know if you just want to have more videos of this variety from me, because honestly I really like just sitting here and ranting about books because it's kind of fun. And I do plan on doing one next week with Bonecryer's Moon, which was my latest finish and my favorite book of 2020 so far. So that'll be more enjoyable. I'll just be sitting here sobbing, so good luck with that. Please don't let me discourage you from reading this, because I'm clearly not in the majority of people who actually read this book and rated it. So don't let my personal opinion discourage you, and just read whatever you want, because books are so subjective and it really, like, anybody can think anything of them, and that's part of the reason I love them so much. Thank you all for tuning into this video, and I can't wait to see you guys soon. And just as a little disclaimer, I'm super thankful for everybody who subscribed in the last few weeks, days. It's been such a growth journey for me, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I feel healed and rejuvenated, and I just thank you everyone for being part of my journey. And until next time, bye readers!